We'll start with the sort of the risks part of the risk and regulation. What are the fundamental risks as you see them as it relates to deep water offshore drilling?
Yes, so there are risks to safety, there's risk to the environment, and then there's concerns that if you decide not to drill, you'll have to pay some consequences, which could be described as risks. So the price of oil could go up, the incentive to go elsewhere that might not have as good safety regulations could also increase, and you could increase the risk of having some increase in price or increase in oil shocks, which have a lot of devastating consequences to the economy and to people. And if there is a catastrophic spill, like in Deepwater Horizon, it can really affect people's lives. So shrimpers were suddenly turned into skimmers. And some people are now claiming that there are health effects and it affected tourism, at least in that initial year. So there are many negative consequences.
Now, when the general population, I would guess both in the U.S. and Canada, think about the risks, what comes to mind are these catastrophic events. You don't have to go too far back to talk about BP in the Gulf. Is talking to Sandy, you would get the impression he thinks that distorts the debate, in that catastrophic outcomes are rare, and so as a result, starting there distorts how you think about these things. I'd like your opinion on that. How do you factor into the equation the possibility of a catastrophic outcome?
It generally is fairly rare. Uh, Before Deepwater Horizon, the last really catastrophic offshore exploration incident was in 1969 off Santa Barbara. However, if you're thinking about someone on the coast, it's really their value judgment, their politics that will help determine this. And for some people on the coast, if they have a good livelihood, maybe they don't have to drive all that much if they live in a city. Say here we're in DC, you could use public transportation fairly frequently. Maybe you feel like there's a lot to lose and not all that much to gain from offshore drilling. So it's not entirely incorrect to make that value judgment. Uh, but different communities, different people have to consider that, and they should keep in mind that there's a good chance that there won't be anything very detrimental that happens.
On the regulation front or on the decision making front, Sandy advocates for a Canadian type model where the locale has much more to say than the federal government, versus a U.S. model where it's a federal partisan political issue. What can you tell us about your view of what will work best as a regulatory measure?
Yeah, I think the current breakdown that the US has is fine. I think states do have more of a de facto kind of role in terms of where drilling can occur. Uh, it would be interesting in the future if there were a Republican president who tried to have offshore drilling occur, off the north in the Northeast, or western part of Florida, or on the West Coast, what the reaction will be. I assume it would be fairly strong and fairly negative, unless the price of oil is, say, $200 a barrel. Then maybe anyone will say, okay, I'll accept some more risk, just considering what circumstances we're in. But the Canadian system is quite different. It's much more decentralized, and I don't think we're going to change the relationship between the federal government and states to a huge extent on this one issue.
The final thought looking forward, energy development is a necessity. Energy consumption isn't going away. There are vulnerabilities when it comes to oil with unstable regimes and volatile parts of the world. So just moving forward and looking at the North American continent and the option of deep water offshore drilling, what are your either thoughts on what might happen or where we're headed, or even recommendations for where we should be headed?
So, in general, production is expected to increase both offshore and onshore in the US, and we're always going to be somewhat vulnerable to volatility in the Middle East. Because we have a world oil market, even if we were completely energy independent, if there were some huge crisis in the Middle East, we would still experience higher prices. We would have the benefit of not having this affect our trade deficit all that much, and at least there would be American companies that would benefit. But from the standpoint of consumers, they're making a trade-off that they might not think is all that great. Okay, they're not giving money directly to regimes they don't like. Now they're giving money to oil companies, which traditionally have not had, the public has not had very favorable attitudes toward them. You probably cut the. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you think is most important to talk about?
No, I'm just trying to think about is if there's anything else to say on that last point. I don't know if there's any way to splice it together.
But where you did stop to think does work as a period, if that's.
Okay.
I was listening to it that way, and I thought you were going to go to a different direction, because that did sound like a complete thought to me.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think that's it. I didn't want to necessarily end completely negative on offshore drilling. I mean, with an increase in offshore drilling, there also is an increase in jobs. And going forward, there are a lot of policies that deal with consumption. So as supply increases, with stricter fuel economy standards that the Obama administration has been pushing, oil demand will tend to go down, and if there can be a big technological breakthrough, say inexpensive batteries, it might go down quicker than we expect.
That's the big great hope, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's an exponential leap in
Yeah.
technology. What about technology as it relates to deep water drilling? Are there technological breakthroughs on the horizon there?
Well, so in the Gulf of Mexico, at least what I read was they've gone about as deep as they can. So there can be technological breakthroughs, usually in terms of just maybe having one pad or one platform and doing more directional drilling type stuff, and maybe they can extend that. So if they drill one well, maybe they can get more oil, and there are technological breakthroughs for recovery of oil. So there's something, CO2 reinjection, which is described also in terms of in climate change terms, could help increase recovery rates. And then there's going to be some improvements in the Arctic if companies are able to go there. Shell is supposed to start just this year, should they get the drilling permits and they don't get held up in some court. I would say that's probably where the really dramatic improvements will be. I mean, who knows? At some point, could someone drill in the Marianas Trench? I mean, it's possible. And if we think that about 70% of the world is covered by water, that there probably are oil deposits under areas that are fairly distant from land, I assume. Probably not right in the middle of the Atlantic, because that crust is brand new. It's being made every day. But I assume that there are areas in more and more obscure places that if the price of oil is high and technology keeps improving, you can probably get there. But if you drive electric cars, maybe the price of oil will be low enough that there won't be much of an incentive to go and do that.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
And we'll let you know.